In this video, we'll review the LEAP analysis with a focus on contraception. The LEAP report has 4 different reproductive health areas. Contraception is the focus of this particular video, but you can see how contraception really feeds into the other 3 areas: menstrual hygiene, abortion and post-abortion care, and maternal health. Numerous data sources were used for the contraception analysis, including population projections, research and models, prices and sales volume data, and several household surveys. In conducting the analysis, we review people needing and using key reproductive health products. We look at the quantities of those drugs and supplies, as well as the costs. And we look at both the current landscape, where we start in 2019, and then look ahead to different scenarios in 2025 and 2030. The focus of the analysis is on 129 low and middle income countries, which are segmented by income group: low income, middle income, and upper middle income. Currently, there are over 703 million contraceptive users across low and middle income countries. This graph shows users segmented by where they went for their methods. The first bar is the public sector, and the second is the private sector. The colors show what methods women are using. We can see that just over half use short-acting methods, that sterilization is the most widely used method, and that nearly 6 out of 10 obtain their method from the public sector. If we look at the method mix among public and private sector users, we see distinct patterns, and we can see this by changing the graph to the relative view. Here we see that the majority of public sector users rely on long-acting and permanent methods, while the converse is true for the private sector, with most private sector using short-acting methods. The distinct role of the public and private sector reflects in part the differences in health infrastructure in each sector. In many countries, the private sector is dominated by pharmacies and drug shops that do not have the staff or facilities to provide a full range of methods. There may also be financial barriers, both on the part of the client and the provider, that limit the provision of long-acting methods in the private sector. While these distinct patterns hold true across low and middle-income countries, some countries may be an exception to this trend. This graph provides a lot of useful information about where users live and where they obtain their method. Let's start by looking at the width of the bars. The width of the bars show what share of users live in each income group. From here, we can see that upper middle income countries are home to the largest share of users, accounting for nearly 60%. In contrast, just 5% of users live in the low income countries. This is a function of the number of countries that fall into each income group and the size of those countries. Next, if we look at the colors of the bars, it shows that the share of users going to the public versus private sector. And we can see that more than half of users go to the public sector in all 3 income groups. But the role diminishes. A larger share of users in low-income countries go to the private sector as compared to the lower middle and upper middle income countries. However, given the larger number of users in the upper middle income countries, there are more public sector users in absolute terms living in upper middle income countries than the other 2 income groups, shown by the size of the orange rectangle. Here we can see the country patterns within each of the 3 country income groups. These pie charts show the share of users that each of the top 5 countries account for. In low-income countries, Ethiopia holds the largest share, but users are fairly even distributed across the top 5 countries. By contrast, in lower middle and upper middle income countries, a single country accounts for more than half the users of these income groups. When looking at patterns by income group, it is important to keep in mind the influence of these key countries. The current cost of contraceptive supplies is $3.87 billion across low and middle income countries. This is driven primarily from the user purchasing pills in the private sector. Some key dynamics at play behind this relationship include great use of the private sector in upper middle income countries, differences in the methods women use, and relatively higher costs of methods in many upper middle income countries. We align our future growth projections to the UN Population Division projections for the total number of modern contraceptive users. Then we layer in projected shifts in method mix informed by recent changes seen in survey data. While the overall number of users is projected to increase, growth would be uneven across methods if recent patterns of change persist. Implants are projected to see the most rapid growth in both absolute and relative terms, growing by more than 200% and gaining more than 60 million users between 2019 and 2030. However, despite this large growth, they would still only account for 11% of the method mix in 2030. Finally, as the number of users change, as well as what methods they are using, so will the costs. Here we look at the change in supply cost by income group, and if current patterns continue, low-income countries would see the fastest change in relative terms, an increase of 76%, while lower middle-income countries would see the largest increase in absolute terms, $236 million. This has been a very quick overview of some of the key findings around contraception. And next, we're going to move to the website to look at some of the custom reports that you can generate for your particular needs. So here we are on the website, the LEAP website. And you can see that we are on, if you look at the left-hand panel, we're looking at the custom reports. So we're going to start with the custom landscape report. This allows you to choose a group of countries, whether it's income groups or different regions or donor priorities, or an individual country, and then you can isolate results for that country. So as an example, I'm going to choose Brazil. And now throughout this report, all the information and the tables and figures are going to update specifically for Brazil. So as you go through the report, you can see there's a lot of information in terms of looking at the graphics. There's a few things to note. You can hover over segments to get the numbers and percentages. You can change from absolute values to relative values. So here we're looking at the relative percentages, but you can also look at the absolute numbers. And if you want to download this information, you can download either the data as a CSV file or the image as a PNG file. So we won't go over all the different details, but we invite you to explore all the different interesting aspects it is for a particular country or group of countries. You can look at the share of contraceptive users by sector, the contraceptive supply costs by method. Here you can see the dominance of the private sector here in Brazil. And then if you wanted to look within the public sector, you'd want to look at that relative so you could see that breakout more clearly. You can also see different information around contraceptive use and supply cost, and you can use the drop-down list to look at a specific sector or to look at subsidies versus non-subsidies. In terms of projections, you can see how changes in contraceptive users are expected for each method and how that change in method mix is reflected in 2025 and 2030. Here are the changes in costs, where you see a decrease in pill costs and an increase in injectable costs, as well as a lot of information, more detailed numbers that can be used for various reports or studies. So as you can see, there's a lot of information. Once you get to the bottom, you can download this data by clicking on the Download Contraceptive Data button and then going to your Downloads folder. So that is the custom landscape report. There are two other custom reports. You can also do what's called the comparison report. This allows you to look across numerous countries within a group. So again, you can look at income groups, World Bank regions, or UNDP regions, or donor priorities. So in keeping with our theme around Brazil, I'm going to choose Latin America and the Caribbean. So maybe you were focused on Brazil, but now you want to see how it does in context to the region. So again, the text of the report as well as the data have been updated to reflect the selection. And now you can see sort of how Brazil kind of dominates in the terms of the numbers of users by method in the various graphics looking in the region. And again, you can toggle between sectors and see how those things change. Here, looking at sector and the share of sector, you can see in the region it ranges from Mexico having the strongest public sector down to Paraguay with the strongest private sector. And you can see where Brazil relies as sort of second strongest private sector within this group. Similarly, we can look at costs and supply costs by sector, and all sorts of other information that you can look at in addition to change in number of users and other projections looking ahead to the method mix and seeing how that is also impacted. So again, there's a lot of information here. This allows you to see a country or a group of countries and make some comparisons regionally. The final custom report can look at a specific product. So this is called the product deep dive. You can select here. As an example, I'll choose pill. And now this report is customized to looking at pills. And you can see how information around the pill specifically in terms of 129 countries, in terms of users, quantities, and costs. So again, this information allows you to understand the dynamics between the sector, looking at the top uses of pills. And again, you can see how Brazil has come up on top as the #1 user of pills. So if you were doing an analysis of Brazil and contraceptive pill, all three of these different custom reports could be useful for you in understanding and contextualizing that information. And again, we look at projections going ahead to 2025 as well as 2030. You can also look at percentage change and numbers change. Another interesting feature when you're looking at maps is you can choose to exclude China and India. This is particularly useful if you want to see changes within those regions without looking at the dominance of those two countries. So that is what we're going to cover today. We've only sort of touched on the surface of the data that's available, but hopefully you get a sense that there's a lot of information here that you can dig into these LEAP custom reports and find what's useful for your purposes. So we thank you for your attention.